So welcome everybody to our latest DBIO online event. We've been holding these roughly monthly since the last March meeting and nearing the end of this cycle. So it's great that some of you are able to join us in person today. And for those of you watching the recording later, hope you find this useful. So my name is Nancy Ford. I'm a professor of physics at Simon Fraser University, which is located in Greater Vancouver, British Columbia, on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And I've been happy and privileged to be the chair of this engagement committee through APS DBIO this year. So just before we start today's event, I wanted to highlight how to learn about events that are upcoming and encourage you to get involved. So hopefully you can see my screen. If you go to the DBIO homepage on the APS site, you'll see a number of links, including Join DBIO, which we would of course encourage you to do. If you click on this Workshops and Networking button, then you're taken to a list of all of the events that we have held in this past cycle. And you scroll down and you see, oh, look, there's mental health and physics. That's today's. We have one more event coming up, Networking for Introverts, in the March meeting, and that's happening in 2 weeks' time. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how to network, I would encourage you to come to this event. And if you're going to be going to the March meeting, which would be lovely to meet you all in person, this is good for practice, but you don't have to be going to the March meeting to come to this event and practice your networking skills. All of these past events have been recorded. And so if you click on one of the links, then what you can see is a link to the YouTube video that has the recording of the event. So you can catch up on missed events. If you have ideas about future events that you think would be helpful, please reach out to me or to Ray, who are both members of the engagement committee, and we can think about how to make that happen or help you make that happen for next year. A note that you would have seen, this is being recorded, and so others will be able to view it. Ray will introduce a little bit more about how we will work this so that if you have more confidential questions that you want to ask, don't worry, you won't need to be associated with them in real time or in the recording. So I thank Ray for putting this together and our panelists, Andrea, Mike, and Denise for participating, and I'll turn it over to Ray now.
Thanks, Nancy. Welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm the host. I'm Ray. I am an assistant professor of physics at Concordia University in Montreal, where there is loads of snow right now. I'm really excited to welcome our three fabulous panelists. If folks who are here live could keep their microphones off, except for the panelists, that would probably be the best way of doing it. So I have a list of prepared questions that I'll be asking, but I encourage the audience to ask questions as well. If you could type them in the chat, I think that's the best way to do this, and then I'll ask them. If you don't want anyone to see your question, you can just send it directly to me, because I know this can be a difficult subject. Of course, I won't associate names with questions by default. I'll just say a question from the audience. If you have some specific reason that you want me to give your name, I'm happy to do that. Just, flag and let me know. And just thanks to all the panelists again. Please welcome Denise, Mike, and Andrea. And I guess the way I was going to start is just to say, maybe if our three panelists could introduce themselves, their institutions, and then maybe you could comment on what you think is the most pressing, the most pressing issue that you've really seen or experienced with mental health in biological physics.
I can start. Hi, I'm Michael Morell. I am an associate professor in the physics and biomedical engineering departments at Yale University. And I guess among the most pressing issues that I see are issues of burnout. So students, postdocs, all trainees, even faculty who are reaching some apex, either the kind of, approaching the end of their term or approaching tenure, that definitely seems to be a very sensitive period, in which I think extra care for sure is needed.
Yeah, I agree. Also, my name is Andrea Welsh. My pronouns are she, they. I'm a postdoc at University of Pittsburgh. I'm currently in the math department, but my PhD is in physics, and I'm doing math bio research or biophysics research. I would also say on top of burnout, I know that I've seen a lot of people deal with unclear expectations in terms of what is expected of them day to day. How productive do you have to be? What needs to be prepared for meetings, and trying to make timelines to stay on task. I feel like these are all kind of in this unclearness of work that we have to deal with.
Hi everyone, I'm Denise Zerol. I'm an assistant professor at Concordia University in Montreal. I'm in the same institution with Ray. I'm not a physicist by training. I'm a chemical engineer by training. I do biophysics research though, so I always feel the pressure to say this in a physicist environment. So let me just say that. In addition to what's been mentioned about what's most pressing issue, burnout and unclear expectations, I would add that I think uncertainty about, like, in addition to the unclear expectations, uncertainty about future or lack of support when it comes to what students can do after graduation, or what students like what are the job prospects, what's going to happen, that presses a lot of pressure on the students because they're just unsure what to do next. So I think in addition to burnout and unclear expectations, that is another pressing issue in my opinion.
And I think I'll just note, because it's a little, I'm not used to doing panels by Zoom. If people have more to respond to, it's just the three panelists. So I think it's fine for all three of you to just kind of talk back and forth. But having said that, if people are being quiet for a while, I will move on to the next question and everything. So that's just kind of how I'm thinking about it. I can actually thought we could get started from a question that I got from somebody who can't be at this panel, but I was sent an email, and hopefully the person will be able to see the recording. So we often use technology like Slack and like Discord and stuff, especially a lot of these instant messaging apps, to mobilize ourselves, to connect with one another, gain a support network. I know Andrea in particular and I are part of a Slack that's been really, really helpful for us. But some folks, particularly some of the older members, have difficulty using or accessing the technology, like their browser is outdated, or their OS won't let them sign into Slack, or they can't even get on Zoom, stuff like that. So they actually there's this barrier that the technology is setting up, as well as the barriers that it's removing. So does anybody have maybe any suggestions or brainstorming that you can think of that might help us connect with folks who don't have access to that up-to-date technology?
I guess I might suggest those that have access to it and know how to use it, help those that don't. So maybe whichever of the media is most accessible, whether it be Slack or messaging apps like Skype or something like that. I really agree. I think that's a really good way. That's a really good way to remain in contact. We stepped up our game with that a lot during COVID because people felt isolated, and so even kind of what someone might consider kind of trivial messaging actually really served to kind of enhance the community. So since then, we're pretty avid users of Slack, of Skype, of pretty much any type of instant messaging media and everything else, because we're all in contact with each other.
I would like to add to that. I think we can push for new services on our campuses and our institutions. Something like this, I could imagine having training set up to help people that are not as like confident using some of these different programs, making sure that I know with Zoom, there are these issues where if you don't have like a paid service, you only have access to certain things, making sure that like the university is providing that sort of service. I mean, even with Slack, it only keeps certain messages so far back, which might not be what was intended. But if the institution can help provide these things, make sure it's accessible to everyone, make sure everyone can find places where they can learn about how to use it or get help. I mean, I wouldn't know exactly who to contact on my campus if I needed help exactly with Zoom or Slack. Even last week, I needed help with MATLAB, and the people that were listed as the contacts couldn't really help me. So, it made it like another barrier for doing the work I need to do. So we could push for those services to make sure that it's accessible to everybody.
No, yeah, I agree what's been said. And I was kind of thinking, I get overwhelmed by Slack sometimes, like especially if I'm part of a like larger Slack community, then like there's so many messages, right? So although I can use Slack, like maybe there might be some folks who prefer not to, because sometimes it's just overwhelming to see so many messages on so many subjects. It may not be the right platform for some of the folks, not because they're not accustomed to the technology or they're experiencing some technological issues, but just because it's overwhelming. I mean, if you have a Slack for your work environment, for your lab, maybe that's just like, you can use it as it's supposed to be used, like just messaging and like we have a meeting now and then, or like, did you do that? Did you do this? That type of messaging. But especially like big group Slacks, I find it very overwhelming actually. So do I really want to know like all that's been going on? Maybe not, right? So I'm not sure, like I do have mixed feelings about Slack. So I do sort of agree with the person who, who brought up this issue, not because of technological reasons, but it might just be overwhelming too. I do like, I'm a bit old school, I do like email. So because it just comes into your inbox and then you read it when you want to read it, right? So maybe, and like, it could be, for example, if it's the bigger part, like bigger community Slack, there could be like a monthly newsletter or something, just keeping people up to date on certain things, right? Do I really want to read all the messages? Maybe not. Like maybe I just want to be updated on certain things. So that could be an option.
Okay, so thank you. I think all of that is really valuable because this isn't actually something that I'd thought about too hard before receiving this question. So I'm really glad that folks had some things to say on it. So I'm still going to go down my list of questions, which they're a little bit grab bag, to be honest, because I've never hosted something like this before, but hopefully we can get some good conversation out of them. So my next question is, how would you suggest that a student, a graduate student or a postdoc or an undergrad, it might depend on the level, what might be the best way for them to bring up a mental health issue with a supervisor? So like, or maybe that isn't the right way to go. If somebody is like struggling, what would be the first avenue or the best way for them to get help? Because it's a really scary thing to do, I think.
I can start on this because I've had personal experiences. My students came up to me directly And I'm really glad that they felt comfortable enough to do that. So they just brought it up during one-on-one meetings. So I have one-on-one meetings with my students weekly, right? And they can talk to me about anything. And if they're experiencing any sort of mental health issue, they can talk to me about that too. I've also had requests about like mental health breaks, which I support, obviously. So, but I think the key here is not, the key point is the students need to be comfortable enough to bring this up, right? So I think the major factor is the supervisor. You just have to provide them a safe space so that they know that they can talk to you. But again, like I'm not a professional, right? So when they talk to me about something, I also feel I listen, but I'm unqualified to help them, right? So I direct them to the right resources. That's the best I can do, and I can listen, and I can give them the space that they need. But again, like there's also, it's important to kind of make that clear that I'm not qualified to help you with what you're going through, but I can direct you to the right resources that you can make use of.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like since I talk about mental health a lot and kind of pushing for mental health support, I know one of the pushbacks that I've gotten from faculty are faculty saying that, we're not trained mental health professionals and we don't, either want to say the wrong thing or just don't even want to deal with those sorts of issues themselves. And I understand that. And I think the thing that is the issue is usually that's not what students are asking for. They're not asking, fix my mental health problems, but there might be some sort of ways that could be accommodated and, making clear as an advisor that you are at least open to that being a discussion. And I know as a graduate student, I dealt with some issues of depression, anxiety, and PTSD, and those manifested in different ways depending on what was going on in my life. And so sometimes, I did need a little bit of a break, or I needed to know that if I was not progressing as quickly as possible at that given moment, that it was okay, and I could, slow down and not have that added stress of, well, I'm feeling like shit and I can't do anything right now, but I'm also, feeling bad, but because I'm not getting anywhere with my work. So just, a few days or a week, depending on what the situation is, and then maybe coming to terms with, okay, well, this is actually a really bad time for me right now. So maybe I need to actually take leave from school at this moment for a month and what that would look like, to continue doing this work when I get back. But I think for students, I think the question was more like, what could students do? I think it is hard to navigate, who to kind of come out to in this sense and who to talk to, how they're going to respond. So it might be worth, bringing up a question where you're not getting too deep in what you're feeling and just asking, is this something you're comfortable talking to me about? That, like, can I talk to you about this issue I'm facing and how we can, change what we're doing right now so I can continue to be productive while also taking care of myself. And that way it's also clear to the advisor that you're not there asking, be my therapist for me. You're not, necessarily, I guess they call it like trauma dumping. You're not dumping everything onto somebody who isn't qualified to handle that sort of thing. But you're saying, well, I recognize this is affecting my work in some way, and I want to find out what I can do with you to make sure that, I'm taking care of myself, but also being a researcher.
Yeah, so I think that, and I guess in regards to the question of what should one do first, or who should one go to first. It's literally whoever you feel most comfortable with, I think, at that time. So it can be your advisor now or later. It can be peers. I think having multiple networks of people, some that are, there can be people that you trust at the university, in your lab. It could be your advisor. You can have people that are not associated with any of those. And so, when these problems first arise, you need support quickly. And I think the first person to go to is whoever amongst those groups you feel most comfortable with. And then take it slow and take it from there at a pace at which, you feel comfortable.
I think that's a really good jumping off point, actually, for the first audience question that I've got here, which is the person says that they'd love to hear the panelists' thoughts on the following situation that they've encountered. Sometimes, as you say, with mental health challenges, you need to step back from work or dial back the number of hours you can spend on focused work. For undergrad students, this can be accommodated through a lower class load, accommodations for exams and stuff like that. But for grad students who are working on research projects in internationally competitive areas, it can be perceived as much harder to sort of dial back. And it can be particularly true for collaborations where you're meant to contribute certain tasks by particular deadlines. A grad student might be completely capable of doing the tasks, but not on the timeline required. Do you have any, or what advice do you have regarding potential solutions for this situation?
So this happened to me. And I'm repeating myself, but as advisors, our job, I think, is also to advocate for our students, right? So I'm in a collaboration. My collaborator wants some data by some date, okay? But they don't know what I'm doing, and what I'm doing takes more time, right? So I should be clear to them rather than dumping that onto the students, just get this data by this date. That, no, you know what, this takes more time and we can send it by that date, but I'm going to send it by the end of the January. So that's exactly what I did. Like, I could have pushed my student to get the data, but I didn't, because I know that we had to be thorough. We had to be like we had to spend more time on it. And I cannot send it by this date, but I can send it by this date, which works well for us. But it's very difficult to do that, right? Like you're saying that this is my boundary, but in academia, usually, like, we're in a very competitive environment, right? So we want to get things done quickly, and like it's I think it's a mindset change that has to happen at the advisor level so that you can support the student accordingly, right? So I'm kind of like going back to the advisors. But like if your advisor is not on board with that, then as a student, you don't really have much choice, right? So if they tell you do this by this date, you kind of have to do it, right? Because it's a competitive environment. I don't know if that helps, but it's just that the advisors have to change their mindset.
Yeah, I agree that there's a lot of like tasks that we're given as researchers that there might not even be a deadline. It might just be get it done as fast as possible. Or, there's kind of this expectation by the next time we meet, we want this done, which might not be realistic depending on what the task actually is, such as what Denise was mentioning with I think looking at data or something, or it might not be reasonable given what other sort of responsibilities the student has. So I think it is very important for the advisor to be that sort of advocate if it's part of a collaboration. But also I think that the advisor needs to work with the student, both of them working together to find out, even when there's no collaboration, okay, we might have to change our timeline for this. How do we change this timeline so that we're both, we might have to, concede some things like, okay, I need to wait a little bit longer for this, or, otherwise this is going to be rushed and maybe not as complete, not as well thought out, but, how are we both going to be happy? And yes, work against this mindset of working all the time, working as fast as possible. I know that my mental health changed significantly once I stopped responding to emails after a certain hour in the day, and also didn't respond to emails on the weekend unless it was like something really important that I needed to respond to at that moment. So having those boundaries in place, making sure that that who you're working with is respecting those boundaries, and finding advocates, I think, is the key thing that I'm seeing.
Yeah, I actually find that so many of the deadlines that we set for ourselves and in ordinary scenarios don't get met anyway. The nature of work is it's very hard to predict this. I can say, you know, even deadlines I set for myself can be moved by months. So I actually feel like you know, if someone needs a little bit of time to themselves, I probably wouldn't even notice how much it changes a timeline based on the inherent noise in the system as it is, even. So I would say, yeah, I guess speaking up and advocating for that, because in many cases it probably won't significantly detract from the project, at least any more than what your natural fluctuations in, you know, in efficiency are anyway.
Also, I wanted to add one point. One of my students once, again, like I'm very good at setting up unrealistic timelines for myself too. One of my students once said, you know what, Dr. I don't think I can finish that at that time. So that's, as a student, I think it was a turning point for me, because that was the first time a student told that to me. And I realized that they should be able to tell that, right? So if it's unrealistic, just say it, which could be intimidating, and like majority of the folks may not be comfortable enough saying that, but it's important to say that, because then maybe as advisor, I'm not actually aware that that was unrealistic, because that's how I work. That's how my brain works, right? I set up so many unrealistic deadlines to myself. I have very unrealistic to-do lists, and that I keep doing it to my students too, unless they tell me to, that I don't know, right? So it's really important to say, you know what, professor, I don't think I can make, you know, I don't think I can finish it by that time, but I think I can finish it in 2 weeks, like something like that, right? So like just communicate if you can.
And then the affirmative in that way too, like I can, you know, I can't do that date, but I can do this date. That's definitely the back and forth communication is super helpful on that.
And another audience question is, what about students who stop showing up? So if you have students who are clearly struggling, but you can't seem to reach out to them, they won't answer, or they just sort of even ghost you or something like that. Is there anything that you can think of that could be done to help those students?
So I've tried a few times, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I also teach a class as part of my postdoc position, and I've noticed students that stop handing in work and then stop responding to emails. And one thing is, I tell myself there's only so much I can do. I remind myself, because otherwise I feel like I personally would keep trying and trying. One thing I've done that has worked more often is to, when I send an email, I specify very clearly, like in the subject line, you know, that I'm not upset and that I just want to talk and check in. And I feel like that's because I know as a student, I felt a lot of shame, especially when I wasn't meeting homework deadlines or work deadlines. And when things started to pile up, that usually made it worse. So sometimes I would not even read the email, because I know that reading the email would make me feel very sick, very like to my stomach, and feel shamed about it. So you know, I might make assumptions like, this is just somebody who's going to be mad at me, it's going to make me feel worse. So I've noticed that putting this kind of caveat almost in the subject line has helped students say, okay, like, you know, this person is just trying to help me figure out what's the issue and like find a way to work around it, find a way, you know, to figure out what's best for me, instead of just telling me off, instead of just kind of confirming these already negative feelings I have about myself. And like I said, this hasn't always worked for every student, but I have noticed that it was working a lot more than, you know, either, well, giving up completely and not, you know, following up with the student, or I had one student just, you know, I didn't think of it this way until unfortunately after that class. And I had one student where I was reaching out like every 2 weeks and I was just not getting anything. And I think it is going to be different person to person. And I do have to tell myself that, you know, it's not going to work for everybody. And I have to be keeping within my own means to help people. And I can't like spend all of my time and energy, but I think making sure that it's clear to the student what you're reaching out about and trying to make it as like low stakes as possible. If somebody's like really in crisis or struggling, that can help a lot.
Yeah, I would say if someone's not showing up, then I guess my mind, you know, I would want to know which scenario is it should I be worried like they're not showing up and I'm worried, or they're not showing up because perhaps they need some space. And so I think, you know, probably through, you know, repeated, you know, efforts, maybe talking to other people, trying to get an impression of which one it is. Because sometimes I think people need their own time and they're fine, but then other times if you don't hear from someone that might make you, you know, a bit more worried, right? So somehow we've got to be able to assess that scenario in terms of how to reach out and stuff like that. You know, there's other advocates I think we can, you know, we can go to, other people in the department, maybe those that are going to be less involved, or even not department, but less involved in the mentor-mentee relationship in case that's an impediment. You know, maybe if it's work related, they may prefer to speak to someone else. So, you know, you might try alternative ways to reach out, maybe through other people. But I think it's really important to try and, you know, figure out which type of scenario that is.
I agree. If this happened to me, like let's say I'm one of my master's students is not showing up to group meetings, to my like one-on-one meetings. First, I would be very worried. Second, I think I would reach out to someone else, as Michael said, like maybe the could be, I don't know, depending on the situation, could be the chair of the department if you feel comfortable, or like maybe the ombudsman or something like student center, or you know, some, as Michael pointed out, someone who's not as involved as you are, to reach out to them and see if you can get some response from them, because that would make me very worried if they don't show up to you know, the meetings, or you know, they're not showing up in the lab. That's just a very worrisome situation. Just to, you know, like reach out to them and see what's going on, then, because like without communicating, you don't really know what to do, right?
And here's another question and comment from an audience member. So this is a little bit more faculty centric. Faculty often have a pressure to put on a public face of well-being and success, that they're on top of everything because of things like tenure and promotion and students being more likely to join the group, even when they're struggling with mental health issues. It can be really taboo for faculty to be outspoken about this kind of thing. And the audience member just wants to know if anyone has any thoughts on what can be done about this.
Oh, I have so many thoughts on this. Okay, I suffer from generalized anxiety disorder. I also suffer from obsessive and compulsive disorder. After having my son, I had postpartum depression and anxiety, and I'm very vocal about these things. And I think that's the key. We have to talk about it and normalize it. Like if I'm not feeling well, if I have the flu, then I don't show up to work, right? Because I don't want to make others sick, and that's okay to say. Why not? It's okay to say that you're suffering from a mental health issue. Like, unless we talk about this, it's gonna just keep being a taboo and stigma. And I am very also vocal about the challenges that I go through as a parent with my department chair, for example. And I'm very lucky that I have a very supportive department chair. Obviously, this could have been a like completely different scenario if I didn't have support, but that's how we can change it. Like I've been talking about this. People are very good at pretending for many reasons, right? So sometimes we really have to pretend, like we have to pretend that we have it all figured out. And that sets up a very unrealistic expectation for students too. They think that like this person is just like, they know everything, or like they're very, I don't know, healthy in many ways, mentally, physically, whatnot. In reality, no, I'm not healthy. And it's to normalize it, you just have to talk about it. Once I said to one of the students, like the committee meeting was coming up, and then they were very nervous during the practice presentation. And I said, well, it's okay to be nervous. Like you're giving up a presentation. And then, although that was something that's not really, like, I say this all the time, it's okay to be nervous. But then the student said, thank you to me, because I normalized being nervous during the presentation, right? Because everyone says that, oh, don't be nervous. Like, we just have to normalize the feelings. We just have to normalize being human, really. But I know it's tough. I think the only way is to just speak about it, just talk about it, normalize it as much as you can. The more we do it, the better it's gonna get, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Sorry, Michael, did you want to talk? Okay. I definitely agree with that. And it's actually similar to what I was telling students at the conference for undergraduate women in physics this weekend, that we need to normalize our failures, quote unquote. So getting papers rejected, or not getting a grant, or applying for jobs, and how few maybe interviews we get, because we're so good at kind of showing off all these successes of things that we've done, that it makes it look like we're succeeding all the time, and everything we try, we hit it out of the park, and we definitely don't. But it's showing to other people, especially the younger people who don't know yet because they're not at this stage in their career. It shows them, okay, these people are succeeding, they're getting all these papers, they're getting all this, I need to do that too. And so they're not aware of all those failures. They're not aware of all those misses that we get when we're applying for things. Today, I'll share that I did not get a travel award that I applied for. So, I did feel a little bad about it, but I know I definitely wasn't the only one. And there have been moments in the past where I have gotten things that I've applied for. So being open about it is very important. And in general, I also try to be open about not only these sorts of failures, but just other things that I'm struggling with. I had mentioned in my Calc 1 class this semester that, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and that's something that I'm still trying to figure out, but basically said, if I'm a little disorganized, I am working on it, but this might be why. And I've had multiple students throughout the semester come up to me and tell me they appreciate that I even mentioned that, or, acknowledge that that is something people can struggle with because it helped them. And, they had asked for some advice, and some things I can't help with because I'm still trying to figure out myself, but it at least gave them some sort of representation, some sort of insight into, okay, well, there are people at this point that have gotten there despite having these same struggles that I've had.
Yeah, and I would say in terms of faculty handling, these stresses, I mean, I make a very intentional effort to create a community. I have a network of people that when things get ugly, you know, we are only a Zoom call away. And so I take advantage of that as often as I can. Again, kind of always relying on that support network, I think is really important. And I also like the idea of, in the sense, normalizing. I mean, you know, there's plenty of scientists in history that we know have had struggles, you know, so even as we're teaching and adding maybe a historical element to some of the stuff that we're talking about, we can bring up the person, right? Because we're also not the first, you know.
And sort of, no, I don't know if this is related or not, actually, but are there particular mental health issues that you see that are specific to biological physics or specific to physics, or are most of these actually more associated with academia in general?
I'm not a physicist, so I don't think I can answer this. But I think there's no such thing as, you know, specific to a discipline. I think it's more academia in general, because it's like such a competitive landscape, right? We still are thinking of publish or perish, you know. It's that mindset that's creating all sorts of issues, which is applicable to, I think, all disciplines. Maybe more so in some than others, but
Perhaps the interdisciplinarity of it could be something. I mean, I remember when, you know, I was a PhD student and I decided I really liked biophysics. I was also trying to figure out kind of like where on the spectrum of theory to experiment I am, and part of that involved like a self-assessment of how good I felt at various stages and on various things. And I think that, you know, that can definitely lead to stress, this issue of identity and where one fits, perhaps. Maybe that's the same everywhere, but, you know, with me at least, I think it was related to, you know, how I kind of identified on this spectrum. Yeah.
So this is something that I've thought about quite a bit, because I have given talks about mental health in physics specifically, and some people have asked me, you know, why physics? Why not just other fields? It's like, well, I'm more like familiar with what physics education is like, physics grad school, and the expectations of being in the physics field. So that's what I'm kind of sticking to. But one of the statistics that I had found, I think it was just for undergrad students. I don't know if they had something, it might have been something similar in grad school students, but I'm not sure. But it did show that there was actually a difference in, you know, people diagnosed with certain poor mental health conditions, depending on what field you were in. And physical science was actually one of the lowest, and I'm not sure why exactly it was. It didn't really come up with some suggestions for why that might be. But I think one of the things that you know, Michael said about identity, I think that's very important. And we do know that physics does have one of the worst representation in terms of people of color and for women. And so I would imagine that, and this is kind of speculation, that there's probably a lot more issues of things like microaggressions, things of these sorts of biases where certain people are being spoken over most of the time, than fields where the numbers might be more equal. But I'm not sure. But I would say that those sorts of behaviors do play into mental health. So, you know, if being in a research group where at least at one point I had an advisor that wasn't listening or speaking over me a lot, it did make me feel like I wasn't worth being listened to. It made me feel like I wasn't good at what I was doing, instead of the fact that like, okay, this behavior is wrong. So I don't know, I don't have like the stats to back it up, but I do think that there might be some difference depending on the makeup of the population of the field. And we do know that there's a drastically different population in physics as opposed to biology specifically, or chemistry. I'm not sure so much the subpopulation of physics with biophysics. I do tend to see a lot more women, for example, in biophysics than other areas of physics, but I'm not sure about other identities and how that makeup is. So that's.
And what actions do you think that we can take, or have you seen taken as a community, to improve the mental health of our community members?
A tough one, everyone is thinking. Well, this had like there's so many things that need to change on so many levels, right? So like there needs to be a systemic change. So I guess on an individual level, as advisors, I can only speak to that. Is being like treating students as, I try to do that, like treating students as junior scientists and trying like being open to their ideas. And as Andrea just mentioned, for example, if an advisor is not like turning a blind eye to them, like not listening to them, then it could make the students think that, okay, I'm not worthwhile, or my ideas are not good enough, I'm not good enough, which contributes to, you know, low self esteem and depression and maybe anxiety. So just treating them as junior scientists, you know, scientists in training, and then being open to what they want to say, and letting go of perfectionism also is key, I think, as advisors, that we need to sort of like some things can be good enough, right? And then everyone has their own standards of doing things, and some things can just be good enough and we can just accept that. And again, like being open and communicating about realistic timelines, so that you don't really push students to the point of burnout and then just, you know, expecting good, you know, scientific performance from them. That's on the advisor level, but I think like as a community, to support both student and faculty mental health, there needs to be a systemic change where we recognize that mental health is also health, and it's okay to talk about it, and people need support to go through tough times. And one thing that I would like to see more of is that there are, like, for example, at Concordia, there's a student center. Students can go and, you know, get all kinds of supports that they need. But I think that's not really so, like at the faculty level, there is also some support, but I don't think that's not enough, right? So I think the institutions also have to spend some more funds on supporting faculty mental health, because if faculty is healthy, then their students are going to be healthy.
I think it, you know, in terms of larger community, I guess at the university level, so, you know, Yale recently has changed some policies, for example, with how it deals with undergraduates who are experiencing distress. So I believe in the past, there was a stronger push for students to disenroll and take time. And now that's changing such that they can accommodate the students on campus more. And so I see these as kind of positive changes. Basically, I guess, removing negative consequences for exposing and talking about your issues. So I guess if many universities did something like this, I guess that would constitute a community level improvement, is to enable those who are experiencing problems to be able to kind of continue more on their own terms. In this case, in that specific case, not being encouraged to unenroll immediately.
Yeah, I think both of those are great ideas. In terms of what Denise was saying, I've also found that support for postdocs are pretty non-existent in a lot of universities. It's like universities don't know what to do with them. Are you students? No. Are you faculty, like professors? No. So there's even this like weird middle ground of like, okay, well, we don't even know you exist, which is a frustrating feeling. But I think, yeah, support groups for faculty talking about issues that they're facing could be very beneficial. And with faculty, I'm also including like postdocs in that, because I'll say that one of the things that was most useful to me as a grad student was that because my university did not have a lot of sessions available for individual counseling, I ended up doing a lot of group therapy, which meant that I got to meet a lot of graduate students that were not necessarily in my field. But when I was talking about some of the effects of things going on in my research group or in my department as a grad student, it was really helpful to hear the perspective of other graduate students. And this was a weekly space that I had. And, sometimes I would get suggestions of how to handle things, but also it showed me that there was another way to do things, like the way our group was running, which I felt at the time was not a very healthy group in terms of, just how some people were being treated and how things were being pushed on us or how people were being ignored. It made me realize like, oh, okay, this isn't just academia, or this isn't just physics. There are other ways of doing this, and we can make these changes and we can improve upon it because this is what this group does, which is different. And it sounds like, they're handling things a little bit better. So having some space to, connect and talk about those things, I think would be really helpful. And another thing is that I know, speaking to a lot of, especially, junior faculty, they mention not getting a lot of training on how to manage a group or a lab. Ray's like, yep. So you go from researcher, where you're maybe working with a graduate student or some undergrads, maybe depending on your group and the research and how that goes. And now suddenly you're controlling a group and you have to set all this up. And there's really no support or no instruction on how to start that. So how do you manage students? How do you set up expectations for others? Setting up expectations for ourselves is already hard, but trying to figure out how to pass that on and say, okay, well, now I want to set up a realistic expectation for you. How do I do that? So having some sort of training of going from researcher to a bit more of a managerial position, and how to support your students, how to support yourself, while doing this, I think would be very helpful. And maybe that's something we can do as a field, is figure out how to do those sorts of trainings.
So we're running low on time, but I think we just have time for the very last audience question. So What suggestions do the panelists have about training that we could incorporate into our graduate programs to enable discussions and strategies for supporting and improving the students' mental health? So similar to how we have training for things like how to give seminars, how to TA, how to identify bias, et cetera.
Recently, Concordia launched something. It's not about students though, it's about faculty, but I think it's for faculty, but I think it could be done for students. It was sort of like a, I need to pull up the email to look at the details, but it was a mindfulness training for faculty that goes on for about 9 weeks, I think. So every Friday afternoon, 3 hours, something like that. Obviously, it's intense. It's an intense training. But I think like at the graduate or undergraduate level, those type of trainings could be offered as part of the program, right? Like it could be like a credit course even, like an elective course or whatever you call it. It could be a workshop that is offered by the university to teach students some coping skills, basically, right? So we are all at the positions we are right now. We are suffering from, for example, if I talk about myself, I suffer from, multiple disorders, but I'm here today because I know how to cope with it, right? So I have some coping skills that I learned through therapy, through some workshops, through self-education, right? So it's really key to teach students those coping skills so that whatever they face, they know how to manage that. So I think it's key to incorporate workshops, seminars, or even like elective courses into the curriculum on mindfulness or could be even meditation, like how to deal with difficult situations. I think it's key to learn those coping skills to just succeed.
I think some of the soft skills too that that Andrea and Denise have mentioned, earlier about how to communicate too would help preempt some things. So like even in addition to the self-care, understanding how to negotiate expectations, so what are the expectations if someone is asking for a certain deadline, again, you can counter. Going through these kind of soft skills, I think would also help, manage these, because I think we tend to learn these on the fly, but there's no reason why we can't have a more formal setting where, we can be encouraged, trainees, everyone can be encouraged on better ways to communicate, because then I think it could, help kind of soften this blow, when things get more difficult.
I know we're at kind of time, but besides like the really good points that are being brought up, I wanted to add how to set goals and see if you're achieving those goals. If you're not achieving those goals, realistically determine why you did not and what could be improved. How to find support networks. I know a lot of graduate students are very isolated and don't know even how to find support networks or form them if they don't exist in a way that's helpful to them. How to find mentors that are not your advisor, so someone else that that might be in the similar field. Like these are ways of reaching out. These are ways of forming that sort of bond. These people in the support networks and these other mentors can also advocate for you when, you might need that. And I would also say something like time management. I know some universities do have workshops on time management, but they're typically mostly undergrad focused. So it's a lot about doing homeworks and things like that, instead of, writing papers, sitting in front of a computer, maybe working on code for hours. I could get lost in that and, feel like I can't stop until I've finished what my code is supposed to be doing. When really I need to also do a bunch of other things that is running in the back of my head too. So, I think those are things that might already exist for undergrads, but would also be helpful for graduate students or young faculty to figure out how to do in that point of your career, how to do that.
I think everything that everybody has said has been fantastic, at least from my point of view. I want to thank all of the panelists again. We probably should kind of wrap up here. I have my next meeting wrapping on my door too. So, but thank you all so very much. And thanks to Nancy and DBIO for hosting this, because I think this has been really, really good.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. That was so useful, and really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts and expertise and everything else. I think a lot of us will benefit a lot from what's been said. So thank you.
Thank you so much.